This week on BSD Now, I'm out of town, but we have a great interview with Ken Moore, my brother, about the latest in BSD desktop computing and, of course, Lumina specifically. Stay tuned for your place to be, SD. Hey folks, glad to have you with us this week. Of course, as I mentioned in the cold open here, my brother Ken's going to be joining us here in a little bit. And we got a great interview, so you're going to want to stick around for that. And I know you guys, we try not to leave you hanging on weeks we're out of town, so this week's no different. We still have some new content for you. But before we get to that, of course, we got to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems. Website for that, ixsystems.com/BSDNow, where you want to go there, and there's just a little form to fill out, name, email address, some contact info, that type of thing. After you fill that out, of course, you'll be able to download their cool guide on picking a vendor for open source servers and, what kind of stuff you need to ask, what are good questions. But really what you're really after is you need to get in touch with those IX sales engineers, right? That's what's really cool about these guys. They actually speak your language. They're not just going to sell you some model of some IX gear off the shelf and hope that, fits whatever you're trying to do.
That's the thing that confuses a lot of people is they go to the IX website and there's not like a list of already built servers there. It's like, well, no, because they're going to custom build the server exactly for what you need. And so without knowing what you need, they can't list it on the website.
Well, and even they do have some things, but even like say their Z20, for example, for TrueNAS, you still call up and say, okay, that's neat, but I need more of this or I need more of that. And they'll help work that out with you. Okay, well, you're going to be doing what kind of storage? Is this to back a bunch of VMware ESXi systems? Is it, are you just going to be doing pure storage? Are we doing a lot of NFS? Is it going to be a lot of Samba? What type of files, what size of the files, do you need this much ZIL, or maybe you don't need a ZIL, maybe you need more L2 ARC, and they're going to ask you all those questions, so don't be afraid to use words like
1 gigabit or 2 gigabits or 4 gigabits.
That's right.
Or do you need 10 or 40 or 100 gigabit mix?
Mm-hmm. They can make all that happen. They'll help figure out which Intel processor needs to go in there if you need to meet a minimum level of CPU performance to push a certain number of packets, help you figure out which disks will work with which block sizes. So you can say things like MySQL or Postgres or, I'm going to be running these type of services on it, and they'll be able to help figure that out for you. So they can make sure it completely performs to your specifications. And of course, they do their phenomenal burn-in once you get the system ordered. They go ahead and assemble it
a number of times.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing worse than getting a new server, taking it out of the box, rack it up, and hard drive fails. It's like,
Yeah.
It's just the nature of hard drives. That hard drives will fail within the first 48 hours. That's why the IX burn-in test is 72 hours. If the drive survives it's more than likely going to do well. And they don't do that just for you. It's also for them because they're providing the warranty and would have to replace the drive if it failed. So they'd rather do that and not have to spend it on shipping.
That's right. So definitely the IX system's different. So get in touch with them when you call or if you email. Be sure to mention you heard about it on BSD Now because they like to hear from our listeners. And it kind of puts you in a little different class of customer or person calling up, right? They know they can discuss certain things with you because, if this guy listens to BSD Now, it must be a sharp cookie. So anyway, get in touch with them and, of course, tell them that we sent you. Okay, well, we're joined today. We have Ken Moore, my brother here, who's been on the show before. First of all, thank you for joining us today. I know it's been over a year at this point. So
has it really been that long?
Last time was like January 16th, 2016.
Wow, okay, so just barely over a year. That's perfect.
Just a year. Yeah.
Okay, so the yearly check-in with Ken is happening. So that's awesome. Okay, well, I guess we're going to talk about Lumina and a bunch of desktop-related stuff going on in the BSD land. So
fire away.
So I guess first start off with an update on Lumina. What have you done in the last year?
Oh, boy. The last year was actually really, really busy because we actually had our 1.0 release of Lumina in, March, April, something like that. It feels like it's so long ago now.
Yeah.
But yeah, we actually released our 1.0 version of Lumina, and that was across all the various operating systems, OpenBSD, NetBSD, DragonBSD, all the Dragonfly BSD. Dragon BSD sounds really cool.
Yeah, there should be a dragon.
Anyway.
Okay, anyway. That'll be the fork of Dragonfly.
And then exactly.
Levels up.
And then all the Linux distros as well. So, I mean, that was kind of our big push. And it's like, okay, it's stable enough that we're going to officially tag it as 1.0. But then even from then on, there's been tons of developments within Lumina itself. We've been adding more configuration utilities. We've added new utilities. The new Lumina archiver is one of them. So that basically it's just a front end to tar on the system. So if you're tired of, manually running DD or tar to try and look at archives, you can now have a graphical tool, which again is just a standalone Qt app front end around tar, around archives and managing things like that. So it just makes it really, really easy and really simple.
So ironically, a lot of that happened because we're in an office now. We have support people for IX here.
Yes.
And when people send debugs in from their FreeNAS box, it's a tarball. And so the support people needed a way they could just click it in their email.
Like, okay. Well, they needed to open the archive, but then also have the ability to preview a single file within the archive without actually opening and extracting the whole thing.
Because sometimes you just want to look at the messages file.
Exactly.
Or want to look at the version number. Or something.
Exactly. So I had to get a little bit fancy with that and delving into the tar man pages and stuff like that to figure out all the various flags that you could do that people don't generally do from the command line manually, just because it does get really convoluted.
So I guess that does answer the question Kris and I had when we talked about that work originally.
Yeah.
You are using the tar command line utility rather than like libarchive to...
Yes. I wanted to use the tar command line utility because I know that at least that is universal, and the 3 flags that I needed would also work on Linux and OpenBSD and all the other operating systems without having to worry about a library that might be completely different.
Or having to haul that library around as a dependency.
Exactly. Yeah. So I wanted to make it as simple and over the top as possible. So it was just kind of a wrapper around the tar utility instead of trying to incorporate and bundle together all this other stuff.
Cool.
Yeah, so as long as Linux tar doesn't go and change the flags crazy in the next year, which they might do. Who knows?
GNU tar is a little different, but I think the tar's standardized enough to hopefully...
For the most part, it's solid.
Yeah. When I was writing the utility, I was trying to look at the Linux man page for tar as well as the FreeBSD man page for tar, and I grabbed the common flags between them. It's like, okay, they seem to have standardized at least on this set of flags, so I don't have to worry about
probably mostly the ones that
changing.
existed before Linux or BSD.
Exactly,
well,
and that's probably where it came from.
I heard they are adding it to System D. It's going to be called Tardy or Tarded. Oh, sorry.
That was good.
Am I allowed to say that?
Anyway.
So are there any other major changes in Lumina?
In Lumina, just a whole lot of really just enhancements. So taking the same systems that were within Lumina, adding new plugins, adding new features and functionality to stuff that we already have the frameworks for. Because Lumina was designed around a plugin mentality, a very, very generic framework, it was very easy then. It's like, okay, now that that's stabilized, we can go ahead and start adding more of the things to go in those frameworks. So more types of plugins, more types of functionality for desktop icons, more types of functionality for, whatever it would be. So it's just been a lot of expansion of those kinds of things.
Yeah, so it's become a lot more fleshed out.
Yes.
For sure.
By the same token, though, we are also tying a lot more of it in with sysadm on TrueOS. And I don't know if this is something you want to talk about now or if you want
we'll get to that. We have questions about that.
I'll wait on that.
Can't jump ahead too far.
But because I work on all these utilities, it's like they all work together in various ways. So it's like, okay, I got to restrict my answers to one particular topic at a time.
They're all bundled.
The synergy between the tools is one of the advantages of, each of these tools is useful by themselves and can be even installed on other operating systems. But when you put them all together on TrueOS, you get a synergy.
Yep. You get the bundle and everything's like, I see how these things work together.
I see that this was designed to work with that, to work with this. And it just all works together.
So what feature, I guess, of the Lumina, say 1.0 or even after in the last year, would you say you're most proud of?
Oh, which one am I most proud of?
I like the desktop icons.
That's probably a tough question. I know you like the desktop icons. I always turn them off.
I know. You don't like, he's got to have a pristine wallpaper that has nothing on it. I want stuff.
I prefer minimalism. I like my desktop, as little as possible on there. And then I have all my favorites set up in the shortcuts in the start menu. Yep. So I can just hit the window button, start typing the search functionality, instantly run an application. So that's the way I typically do it.
Yeah, for me, I never see the desktop icons or the wallpaper because there's always too many windows over top of it.
Exactly. And when I'm developing, it's the same thing. I've just got windows everywhere, so I don't rely on anything being on the desktop.
Well, okay, how about this? So I use SyncThing and have my desktop sync between my work, my home system, and my laptop, and that's my shared folder, essentially. Mm-hmm. So I throw documents and files in my desktop, and then when I go home, they're on my laptop there in the desk. That's my use case for it, which is why having the icons is so important.
You can do it with any other directory, but I understand why
I could, but it's really convenient. Just a boom right there. I hit minimize, boom. Okay, there's that shared file I was working on. Right,
makes sense.
Anyway, go ahead.
I think one of the plugins that I actually use most is I actually use the context menu, the right-click menu on the desktop, more than the desktop plugins themselves. And since that's also plugin oriented, I think the plugin that I use the most for that is actually the JSON menu script, where you can run an arbitrary script on your system to generate a menu for you. And so one of the examples that's distributed with Lumina right now is basically just a wrapper for the ls utility on the command line, list what's in a directory. So I've actually got it set up so with using that script, I can right-click on my desktop, open up the context menu, and I have home directory and I have root. And just highlighting over it generates the next menu, which is everything within that directory. If there's another directory, I can highlight that and it recursively goes and generates menus. So I can basically, with 2 clicks, get to any file or a directory on my system that I would want to. And I think just as a developer, that's really useful to me. Mm-hmm. And by having a couple shortcuts to at least different base directories, I can get to everything really, really quickly.
Yeah. Cool. So what do you think of the recent introduction of Wayland support in FreeBSD and the ports tree?
I'm excited about it. I haven't had a chance to start playing with it or looking into it yet, but I am excited about tinkering with it eventually.
Yeah, so I guess that leads to the question, do you think it will impact Lumina?
Yes, I think it will impact Lumina. If not now, then in the future a little bit. I've designed Lumina from the ground up, specifically with the concept of we might be ripping out the graphics stack and replacing it with something else. Because I could see the writing on the wall that Wayland or Mur or one of these other systems was eventually going to come to prominence, and I might need to move from one to another. So even within Lumina, I have kind of segregated all of the X11 and the XCB calls into their own little standalone class. I think there's 1 class, 2 classes maybe, that have all the X11 stuff in it. So literally I only need to re-implement a little tiny bit of a couple files, and then everything should port over seamlessly, because Qt already has native Wayland support, so I don't have to worry about doing anything there as long as I do everything with pure Qt for the desktop itself.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that, because it's like, now that we have Wayland, it just landed. We haven't even pushed it out in our packages yet. I just actually built it a couple days ago. We haven't publicly made it available, but we're hoping here in the near future we can start tinkering with it, because all of a sudden we're looking at not only Lumina, but the login manager, PCDM. Mm-hmm. We could strip all the X bits out of that and make that Wayland native as well.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Yeah, all of a sudden now we have a complete Wayland stack from login to desktop.
Done. Well, the login manager, we have the evil plan that we're actually going to not necessarily depreciate PCDM, but we're going to evolve it and merge it into the Lumina project. So instead of PCDM being its own standalone thing by the TrueOS project just for FreeBSD, I've already got the bits and pieces for doing that in the Lumina stuff with the new window manager system that I'm working on now. I'm specifically designing that in little bits and pieces so that I can take just the pieces I need to do a full login manager as well. And that will also be, cross OS compatible.
So basically KDM for KDM.
Kind of. We'll something like that.
Lumina DM, LDM, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, whatever we're going to call it. But that's the, plan down the line.
Part of doing that, though, is by having better integration with the login manager and the desktop, is we could do things like switching users and leaving their session running, and those bits that are just kind of hard to do and clunky to do.
Yeah, I mean,
you're using Slim or something with KDE, they don't really speak the same language.
It seems like every desktop manager has their own standards for how to do or initialize the switch user routines and stuff. Like KDE works best with KDM. GNOME works best with GDM. Do they call it GDM anymore, or do they call it something else? I don't know. But they're a login manager. Slim kind of barely has support for some of them, and not all. It's every one of them's different. So I'm going to have to do something like that for Lumina anyway. So we might as well just bundle it all in together.
That'll be cool. And as Kris and I talked about when the Wayland port was announced, was the things we were hearing, where Intel's focusing most of their driver development for the i915 and so on towards Wayland rather than X. And they're not even that interested in fixing bugs in the X1. It's like, we would really like to not depend on that so much then.
I mean, they're gonna kind of force the issue, right? Because let's face it, Intel on your laptop's just what's gonna happen. You're not gonna. The days of going and buying a laptop with a dedicated NVIDIA card are becoming shorter and smaller. It's just harder to.
There'll be gaming laptops that'll have bigger dedicated GPUs, and maybe certain engineering type laptops where you can do CAD or something. But outside of that, the Intel card is good enough for almost everything you do.
Yeah, you just don't go to your local Best Buy and see one that has a dedicated AMD, GPU or an NVIDIA GPU anymore. Exactly. It's all just Intel.
It's
really
all
off
just
the
the
shelf.
Intel embedded.
So
or maybe a discrete Intel card on there too, but it's generally almost always Intel.
Yeah, so they're not going to leave us any choice on that. So I think the writing's on the wall. We are going to have to make this switch at some point. It's just a matter of timing, right? Are we going to do it in the next 3 months? Is it going to be a year?
And that's just
we don't have an answer to that yet.
Yeah, and that's why I'm still kind of holding off on Wayland, because I'm in the middle of the rewrite for the new window manager for Lumina and all that stuff. I'm still trying to use the same toolkits, the same XCB functions and libraries that I already had written for Lumina. I don't want to start working on the next transitioning that to Wayland until I know that what I've got works properly first. And then I know, okay, this is the API. I just need to re-implement using the other libraries.
It sounds like you said in the beginning you decided to not that tightly couple to X so that you could replace it. And so that's left you in a good position to be able to keep working with X for now without knowing that you're not tying yourself tighter and tighter towards X so that it's not going to be a problem.
It's a little bit extra work on the development front because I have to remember to keep that segregation in place as I'm developing. I can't just take the quick way out and hack things into all the various classes where I might need them. I have to keep things separate. And again, it's a little bit more administrative overhead, but I think it's better for the longevity of the project.
There's probably going to be some knobs you have to do too, because for example, Lumina works on things that don't have Wayland and maybe won't have it for a while. So I don't know what OpenBSD's Wayland plans are, or Dragonflies, or I'm planning. Not all Linux distros are going to have it right away. So
the way I have it set up right now is that the files that are actually compiled will be determined by a build flag for the Lumina project. So as long as I keep the API the same and the basic variable or functions the same between them, it'll just pick a different CPP file to include for the class instead of completely different files with all these if-defs all over the place.
You just have an if-def around that includes and nothing else instead of a whole soup.
Exactly. Actually, I've gone one better than that for the OS compatibility, because I did something similar for the way Lumina has its OS interface classes. And basically, I have the template class, which is the .h, and that's what sets up the API for the class. But then at build time, it looks at what the OS is, and it only includes the OS file, the os.cpp file. So it basically just skips all the other files corresponding to the other OSs and only fills it in with the proper one.
Cool. It's all pretty.
And I can do the same thing with the X11/Wayland stuff.
Well, that sounds like that will end up working out quite well.
Yeah. In the short term, though, I think X-Wayland probably will still work with Lumina, even if Lumina is still using the X11 XCD libraries. Because I think that's the whole point of X-Wayland. Again, I haven't played with it to be sure, but I think X-Wayland will capture those library calls and simply convert it to the appropriate Wayland ones.
Give us a few more weeks after we actually get the packages built on the TrueOS side and start testing and playing.
Exactly. That's the first step, is just try X-Wayland first. And then, because even when you go to just Wayland itself, I don't think a lot of applications are written to use Wayland yet. So we're going to be really, really limited for that anyway.
In many ways, it's just a lot of the toolkits that are still evolving to Wayland. Like Qt is already there. I think GTK is still doing stuff, or maybe GTK 3 does it now. But.
Well, I guess that I'm really glad now that I wrote a bunch of those Lumina utilities, because all of those will compile and work natively with just Wayland, because they're all standalone
It'll be
tools.
interesting if BSD has the first desktop that works well with the Linux new windowing system.
Shh, don't ruin our surprise. We're going to try and beat them all to the punch. I mean, sure, there might be some Linux distro out there that does it before us.
And there's a few other smaller desktop environments that are already written just for Wayland by itself. What is there? It's like, I want to say Hawaii might be one of them or something like that. I can't remember. There's a few of the smaller ones that are, that's their whole point.
We're getting there, though. We're getting there.
Yeah.
The future looks good.
So moving on to SysADM. What have you changed in the last, it was only a little more than a year ago that you really announced SysADM. And I remember the, Kris talking about it in Tokyo, in fact. So what's been going on there?
Yeah, the concept for SysADM was kind of started actually at BSD Can 2 years ago. So not 2016, but 2015. And it'd been mulling around for a while. And then at the end of 2015 is when we actually started writing it. So a year ago now, we were barely in the beginning stages of SysADM. We only had a couple classes written, things for only interfacing with a couple particular things on the system. Now it's pretty much like a almost full system API. We've got things for PKG. We've got things for updating. We've got things for managing users, boot environments, managing services on the system. We've integrated it with OpenRC on TrueOS too, so everything's just really, really fast there. Task managers. One of the newest pages and classes that we put into SysADM was actually a front end for mouse D settings. So you can actually set up your mouse devices and turn things on or off or change your sensitivity.
Sensitivity was the one that always
the whole
got
9
me,
yards.
When I first did I think it was the first or second TrueOS 12 build with Lumina, and my mouse was too fast. And I opened the control panel and it had SysADM and it had like 3 options and that was it. And I was like, how do I fix the mouse sensitivity?
Exactly. I actually wrote a mouse sensitivity thing for Lumina using the X protocols, actually talking to the X display server to manage the devices. But that's a terrible way to go, and I'm probably going to rip it out of Lumina here soon anyway, because the properties are so archaic and hard to understand that I don't think anybody can actually use them to adjust sensitivity unless you're a masochist and really want to just sit there and play with various numbers and figure out what they do. Because they don't have a simple just acceleration or linear acceleration. It's all these weird properties and profiles, and they have like archaic definitions of this profile number somehow corresponds to this thing over here, but they don't tell you that anywhere. Stuff like that. So it's really weird. So I think I'm going to rip that out of Lumina soon and instead rely on every OS needs to have their own way of setting the mouse stuff, because that really is the proper way to do it. Mouse D for FreeBSD. I'm not sure what the other BSDs or Linux will use for mouse controls, but that's one of the things. It's like, okay, it's not the job of the desktop environment. That's the job of the operating system to actually manage the devices.
So what plans do you have for the future, SysADM? What new UI things are coming soon?
New UI things for SysADM. Oh boy.
We just talked about jails.
Yeah, we talked about jail support. We kind of have a front end for IOCage right now, but with the new Python version of IOCage that was just released for FreeBSD, we need to kind of go through our APIs and make sure that they all stay up to date and update the UI for that as well, so that it works with the newer version of IOCage. We still have IOHive. That's still available there, still partially working. There's a couple things that IOHive still needs, direct control to finish setting up, particularly when creating a VM, but you can start and stop them from SysADM just fine. All that stuff is easy. It's just the interactive, okay, how do you want to actually load this up and install the VM? That still requires a little manual tinkering with IOHive.
We still need a shell or a terminal.
A terminal, yes. Yep. Actually, I have a terminal. I've got it going in the Lumina project first, and it's like 90% done.
It's close.
But the whole point is I had to write a new one is because we needed it in with a completely split brain, if you will, in that the PTY exists on one system, but the actual interface for the terminal needs to exist on a completely different system. That way we could do it through SysADM, for instance. So we had to abstract it out and split it up because most terminals actually seamlessly blend the two of them together, and it's really hard to untangle them.
Yeah, and why that's important for those that don't know is SysADM also lets you remote control machines.
Yes.
So while it's the control panel on your TrueOS box, you can also point it at another TrueOS box or say a headless box you have somewhere, and you can do things. So we wanted a way where you could just pop up a terminal and boom, you can start doing shell stuff without having to even have SSH running. Right? If you've already got SysADM connection in, why start a second service?
Exactly.
Yeah, so you could
and that was the whole idea.
Control the Raspberry Pi that runs your TV, or configure your FreeNAS. Maybe deeper in the OS level type stuff that not necessarily from the web interface.
Exactly. But the SysADM client is also OS agnostic. We have builds for it for FreeBSD, for Windows, for OS X. Maybe someday we'll roll an Android and iOS version of it as well. But since that's cross-platform capable, you don't have to worry about installing PuTTY on Windows in order to get a terminal into your system now. Now, if you have the SysADM client on your Windows system, you can literally connect to your FreeBSD box and have a terminal right there at your fingertips as well without having to install a bunch of other stuff.
In addition to all the GUIs, right?
In addition to all the other stuff.
Package management and
an Android version of it to control the video player on my Raspberry Pi or whatever that's connected to my TV running TrueOS would be quite fancy.
Yep.
patch as well.
Exactly. But that's kind of the goal, at least. We're still working towards it, but there's just a couple snags that we hit with the terminal. Like I said, most of it's functional. I'd say about 90% of it, but there's just a couple really, really low-level bindings that we're still missing.
I think we're actually closer to someday having that happen. JT, our producer here, actually, maybe when you see him again, Alan, you have to ask him about how he's got another Qt thing we've done internally here running on Android. Yep. So like I actually have it on my phone. It's like, oh, that's cool. Like the same thing I have on my desktop runs on my phone now, and I can use touch, and it's really nice.
Separate project that we work on, but similar in concept to SysADM at least. So
cool.
So I guess that's kind of the future of SysADM.
Yep.
So, okay.
Future actually now that we've talked about Lumina and SysADM, let me tell you just a little bit about the plans for merging them. Well, okay, not merging them, but the Lumina 2 that I'm working on right now, which is the version of Lumina with the built-in window manager and everything. It's on my system back there. I don't want anybody to run it at this state. It's nowhere near ready, but we're getting there. One of the things that I had to do in this rewrite is I actually built what's called an OS interface class built into it so that we can keep persistent connection to the local operating system on TrueOS. That would be through SysADM. So you can actually have a direct connection to a system on your some kind of service on your system to actually get events and get notifications. And that opens up a whole other, realm of things that we can have interfaces to within Lumina. So, for instance, if you need to control your brightness or you need to control your mouse settings or things like that, you can actually do that within Lumina as well, but it's actually talking to the OS itself through whatever OS interface you have.
So SysADM.
So SysADM will basically become embedded into Lumina as well on TrueOS systems.
Cool.
Or the API as well, which is really
cool.
The
API, yeah. Yep. Not the server itself, but it'll just be like another graphical client to the SysADM API.
Cool.
So our next sponsor this week is going to be DigitalOcean. Website for that, of course, digitalocean.com. There's no slash or anything at the end. Don't worry, that's coming. What you do is you go ahead and go to that site, create an account. So username, password, blah, put your email address in. After you've done all that, there's a coupon code section. That's where you're going to put in free BSD Now. So that's not just BSD Now, it's free BSD Now, all one word, all lowercase. That'll give you a $10 credit, which you can use on DigitalOcean, which $10 on DigitalOcean, I mean, that's 2 months of their lowest end VM, which is still backed by SSDs and give you plenty of room to try things out and play around. Or if you're running hourly, you could do that and stretch it out. Maybe you got a weekend project you're working on, just trying to experiment with something on hardware that you don't own or don't have. Definitely very cool if they let you do that. And of course, the DigitalOcean has locations all over the world. So if you need something close, something far away, no problem. They got you covered. Go check out their speed tester on their website. Maybe you have 2 locations and maybe the one you didn't think is actually faster to you, just depending on the way your internet's routed with your provider. So definitely try that out. I know I did. And I was like, oh, okay. New York is definitely the closest, but maybe Toronto would have been good. I don't know. Charter's weird.
And also, sometimes it's just you want the 2 closest locations or whatever.
That's right. That's right.
The other thing to check out is their community section where they have tutorials and stuff written for all kinds of different stuff. But they even have, for example, if you were bought your droplet a while ago, it might have been running FreeBSD 10.2. But 10.2 reached its end of life on December 31st. So you've been running an unsupported version for a month now, which is about the most amount of time you want to be doing that. So follow their tutorial to upgrade from FreeBSD 10.2 to 10.3 and get back to a supported operating system.
We never give them enough credit for the tutorials, despite their awesome services, right? But their tutorials are really good. There's been a couple times now where I've Googled something like about FreeBSD jails, for example, and right up at the top of the list is a DigitalOcean tutorial. And I wasn't even necessarily doing it on DigitalOcean. It just came up because they had the magic, kung fu I needed to run the right commands to do a thing in a jail. So that's really cool. I mean, you kind of just get all that for free with DigitalOcean, which is pretty slick.
What they do is they have actually a team of editors. And so even just people from the community and their own people will write these tutorials. But when you get something submitted by other people, they have the editors that can help improve the language and make it that much easier to understand and have that consistent style to it. And they do a very good job with that.
Yeah, they had a fantastic one when I was setting up my DigitalOcean droplet on how to run a jail or run multiple jails in there on the single IP address, and it had the PF config. And I could have figured it out, but it was like, oh, it's right here on the tutorial. Just copy and paste a few configs, done. It was like 10 minutes, and I was ready to move on and do something else because that wasn't the interesting bit. I wasn't there to learn how to do PF commands by heart. I just wanted to get some jails spun up, and they had it all worked out ahead of time.
And they have easy ones like how to install Git on FreeBSD 11, which is like one command, or how to track network latency with smoke ping. that's getting a little more involved. Or how to configure an encrypted ZFS pool using DigitalOcean's block storage. So set up ZFS on the external block storage with the password so that, that data can't be accessed by anybody without the password. And like I said, they have how to upgrade, how to set up a Clojure web application, whatever you might want to do. Set up Unbound as a caching DNS resolver. Probably not something you're that likely to actually do on a DigitalOcean droplet, but the tutorial's there and it's all ready to go.
That's great. Yeah, so definitely check them out today, folks. DigitalOcean.com.
So how has it been working with the DRM Next branch now that TrueOS is based on that?
It's actually been working fairly well. I mean, we've got it working on all sorts of newer laptops. The what is it? What are the terms for it? Kaby Lake was the one that came out in 4.9 recently. We just got that merged into TrueOS. I want to say recently. I don't think it's been pushed to stable yet.
No, we pushed it this week.
Is it pushed to stable?
I did it Sunday night, I think.
Okay.
It just went out. So if you want the latest stuff, you can grab it from.
And those laptops are like barely, if actually even for sale yet.
Yeah, it's like you won't really find any Kaby Lake hardware out there yet because I think Intel just announced the official specs for the hardware end of last year or something, right?
So it will ship sometime this year.
So it'll take
we'll be
a
ready
bit.
for it is the important thing, I think.
Yes, exactly. So basically, we're ready for all of that. From what I understand, there's still a few bugs that they're still tracking down with the 5.9 branch because it's still very, very new. Whereas the 4.7 branch that we had earlier,
4.9, you mean?
Or sorry, 4.9. Yeah, whatever it is. The 0.9 branch. I think there's still a few little bugs with that Matt Macy's trying to track down and fix. But so far, it all seems to be working very, very well. The last really critical bug that I can think of with TrueOS right now with regards to all the new graphics stack and DRM stuff actually isn't related to the graphics stack or DRM stuff. It's actually related to the FreeBSD bootloader and Jelly with UEFI. Apparently, the FreeBSD bootloader won't allow you to type in your passphrase, Jelly passphrase for a UEFI boot or something like that.
It doesn't support it.
It doesn't support it yet.
Right. So
exactly. That's one of the things that we're still watching for.
It does the small not encrypted pool thing for it. So there's I sent Kris, I think, the link. There's code and testing. It's just not done yet. That's not by me.
Exactly. And that's what we're anxiously waiting for, because that's really one of the last big bugs that we have in TrueOS at the moment. I'd say most of the other stuff is just minor annoyances that get fixed with the next update that we push out, which again comes fairly regularly. So things are constantly getting better.
Because I did all the work for the BIOS stuff, but it slightly complicates the installer and stuff when it's like, well, you can't use the BIOS thing half the time because we kind of wanted to default to installing it so it supports BIOS and UEFI at the same time. So you know, whatever your computer is, or if you move the disk into another computer, it'll just work.
Yeah. So part of what I need to do here in the future when I get some time is to go pull in Eric's work that he's done. Hopefully, maybe it's already in head by the time I get to it. But if not, I need to pull his patches in. I think they're still in Fabricator at the moment.
I'll have to throw a link up. But if other people want to try it, they should do that. Because I think that's mostly what it's waiting for, is just making sure this isn't going to break a bunch of people's hardware.
I haven't had the time to honestly look at it and qualify it and make sure it doesn't blow things up for everyone else. So I've been a little hesitant to pull it in, but that's definitely on the radar.
And then I think the next step for TrueOS after that is we're discussing ditching Grub. So use the FreeBSD bootloader all the time.
Yes.
Every single partition, but then in what is it? I think it's installed into the MBR. I'm not as familiar with the boot terminology, but use RefineD instead for the graphical interface to the UEFI partition.
Yeah. So dropping Grub, but then install Refine by default on EFI installs.
Right, and that would allow you to handle multi-boot of other operating systems.
Correct.
Exactly, but it's still using the FreeBSD bootloader with all the boot environment support and stuff like that built into that, which just works a whole lot better than Grub.
Yeah, it's bootstrapping properly without the nasty Grub config
Well, in particular because the code I wrote doesn't depend on a config file. It actually interrogates the live ZFS pool. It means it's never out of sync and doesn't. That was the thing that got me with.
And that was the problem with
PCBSD back in the day with Grub, is that if I deleted a certain boot environment and that was the default one that listed in Grub, then Grub couldn't even load its graphics, and then it would break, and then
it would lose its config file and
it would lose its mind and need to be put down.
Overwritten with a new Grub. Yeah, it's like no.
Exactly. So we've been trying to tell people not to install with Grub on TrueOS, but again, because of that one jelly bug, people still are. Yeah, so I'd like to just get that jelly bug fixed so we can ditch Grub entirely.
It's a missing feature.
It's like you said, it's a bug.
It just doesn't support UEFI. It's not. As far as I know, there are no bugs left in my Gelly implementation in the bootloader, other than the fact that it's only for BIOS bootloader.
Sure. No, and that's the plan going forward is actually to make TrueOS only support dual booting, at least out of box at the installer with EFI, right? So we'll install Refine, and then you graphically can pick Grub, which boots a Linux, or picks the BSD loader, which boots TrueOS or whatever, right? Because you have that nice unencrypted EFI partition that has all your little bootstrap loaders.
Exactly. That's how my laptop dual boots TrueOS and Windows even.
Yep, that's actually the way most systems have gone to for dual booting. Is that many BIOSes actually have their own little tiny graphical. Select which partition you want to boot into. Refine D is just a prettier version of that.
It looks a heck of a lot better. Anyway, we're working on that. That's something I want to get to this next quarter.
Right. But so you say the DRM Next stuff and the graphics drivers do feel like they've been progressing and getting better?
I feel like they have. Yeah. I generally use NVIDIA on my desktops, and I never have had a problem with any of those. On my laptop, I use Intel. I think I'm still using the mode setting driver on that laptop. I haven't tried switching over to the actual Intel driver yet with the 4.9 stack.
I have.
You have.
It's getting close.
It's getting close. There's still a little bit of graphics corruption, which is why we don't want to turn it on by default for everybody yet that has Intel drivers or Intel devices. But we're getting there, and it's getting really close.
So mode setting is kind of the future, but yeah.
Because I saw some of the
once we go to Wayland,
of the newer Xorg stuff going into FreeBSD as well.
The call for testing where they're getting everybody to test all the stuff that we've actually had in TrueOS for a while now.
Yeah, I actually ran it this weekend. So using the 4.9 branch with the latest stuff that's landed in the ports tree, if you switch to the Intel driver, you can get accelerated graphics on my X1 Carbon with Skylake. And it works for about 7 to 10 minutes before it panics. But there's no corruption at all during that whole time. And it's like accelerated, like smooth scrolling. Everything's beautiful. It looks great until about that 7-minute mark. And then you panic. But that's way better than where it was, because before it was like 10 seconds in, you're seeing graphical artifacts and stuff. So
that was one of the main things that people would report, is because Qt in particular was apparently affected by it, where if you had graphical acceleration on with the Intel driver in the 4.7 stack, Qt widgets would not repaint and would not redraw, so you'd end up with all these big black blobs all over your applications.
Yeah, it was really nasty.
That was how we knew that something still wasn't ready yet.
Yeah, I'm a little spoiled. I'm still using Ivy Bridge with what's still in FreeBSD's head, so it just works.
Right.
Suspended resume even. But at some point, I need to do a laptop.
Interestingly enough, so just this last week, my X1 Carbon now kind of tries to resume. Like before, it would just suspend and go away, and then power button, nothing would work. Now I can suspend it. When I hit the power button, it lights back up like it's going to come up, and then it hangs. So
it's getting really at least like if
farther.
You have SSH enabled, can you SSH into it?
I haven't tested that.
Because sometimes it's just the video card not coming back, right?
Yeah. That's what my guess would be, because I see stuff happening. Lights are flickering and whatnot. So it looks like it might be alive, but the screen's definitely gone at that point.
I think I remember somebody, I think it was somebody from OpenBSD that I talked to, probably at BSD Can or at one of the conferences. And they said that in order to better get systems to resume after sleeping, it helps to switch to a terminal that does not have X running on it.
Yeah, I tried that.
So if you do that and then suspend, and then when you resume, then you switch back to the other VT, which has X running, and then it works again. So
I don't
know if that'll make a difference.
I think with NVIDIA on my laptop, after resume, there was some video corruption, but if I switched to the text terminal and back to X, it would be all fine.
It cleans it up, yeah. So I don't know if it's something with like the X initialization routine or how it's tied to things.
With the DRM bits,
that's beyond my pay grade.
So can you tell us a little bit about some of the other stuff that's been going on in TrueOS in the last year?
Other stuff going on in TrueOS.
We already asked that one.
That's kind of the stuff that we're talking about here. But really just doing more of the same. We have a number of things with OpenRC that we've implemented in TrueOS recently. So we get much faster boot times, but then we also get much more stable service management. That's what I'm really excited about, because now if you tell, say, service, blah, do something, you can be sure it does it every single time. You didn't necessarily have that with the older RC system because some services weren't managed properly. Like for instance, and I gave this example, I actually talked about this on the FreeBSD forums just a little bit with some people that were talking about OpenRC. But one of the things that I really, really like about OpenRC is the ability to manage individual network devices rather than dropping or reinitializing the whole network stack with the service command.
You know that you can do that, right?
You can do that in
service
FreeBSDs as well.
Restart, NIC. And it
OpenRC just gives you a better listing.
Yeah,
of, like,
I'm trying to say without going around the service to run things like ifconfig, WPA, sub.
No. You can do that with FreeBSDs as well, but it's not as convenient.
Yeah, with the OpenRC, I can just do service network.wlan0 restart, and it just restarts the networking for that one thing. And we're actually working with Joe.
Restart WLAN0 is the equivalent on FreeBSD.
It just takes an early.
Okay. Well, I didn't know about that. Yeah. But one of the other things that we're working on with Joe is we're actually working on making a lot of the initialization of devices for networking. We've kind of done this for removable devices, but we're working on doing it for the actual networking devices as well, where we're tying it into devd itself. So instead of running netif or network to start up everything and have to have all the modules preloaded, we're actually writing the autoload modules into devd itself so that whenever you attach a device, it then scans the device, sees what module it needs, loads the module, and then initializes the device and starts netif or network on that device. Yep. So that it'll make things a lot more event-driven rather than like a single chain.
Yeah, especially for, say, USB Wi-Fi devices and so on, right?
Exactly. USB Wi-Fi devices, but then it also makes things a lot more stable as well. So if you want to attach or detach, just various types of devices. Like I said, we're doing the same thing with removable devices for mass media. We're hoping that might be able to do something with like network storage as well for probing the network and seeing NFS shares, for instance, or Samba shares. That we're trying to take the service model more to an event-based model, which I think OpenRC lends itself a little bit more to than the traditional RC system.
They've been screwing around with devd with auto mount daemon as well. So like it creates the right links and stuff in a directory, and then Lumina throws that on the desktop, where it's like very Mac-ish, like, oh, a USB stick just appeared on my desktop because I plugged it in.
Yep.
How nice is that? And then there's no mounting or unmounting required.
It automatically mounts it in the background when you CD into that mount point, into the directory, and then it auto mounts it and keeps it mounted while you're actually in that directory doing stuff. But as soon as you move away from that directory, I think it waits a second or less, and then it unmounts it.
Cool.
So we can do some things that are similar for all sorts of various stuff. So that's where we're tinkering right now, and it's coming along really, really well. It's working really nicely.
Cool. So do you have any other thoughts on just the basic desktop ecosystem in BSD and how that's changed and what you think the future looks like?
Well, I did see the announcement that the Budgie desktop, which has been based on GTK3/GNOME for quite a while by, Solus Linux, they just announced they're moving to Qt.
Yay.
Because they can't keep up with GNOME. GNOME keeps breaking stuff. It's like, okay, we're trying to use GNOME, but GNOME is trying to make too much stuff private or changing the APIs all the time, and we just can't keep up with that. We need something stable. We're going to go to Qt. And then along the same lines, Qt 4.8 was actually just released upstream by the Qt project. And that comes with the whole, I think, what is it called? Qt Lite system, where basically the whole point is only the individual Qt pieces that you need are actually compiled against your program or bundled in. And I believe the benchmark I saw about this Qt Lite thing is that they were able to compile and run a Qt application on a system with 32 megabytes of RAM. So it makes it much
embedded devices and phones and stuff.
Definitely. So Qt is definitely going the route of being able to run anything on any operating system, any machine, trying to target the whole spectrum of, various types of systems, not just always the latest and greatest, most powerful desktops. It'll work on mobile. It'll work on everything. Cool. So that's why I'm really, really glad that I decided to base Lumina off of Qt as well, because it just continues to expand the market where you could run Lumina. Right. You might be able to run it on your phone someday.
Let's not get crazy now.
Well, right. Maybe eventually.
So do you think System D is going to continue to make things worse for us, though? Or does it seem like there's been resistance to it where less people are using it? Or what's going on?
Well, I always kind of try to keep track of, some of the stuff that's going on in Linux communities. And I don't keep track of it very well, but I do notice that, especially in, I think, Gentoo land, there seems to be a lot of topics where people are talking about moving over to the BSDs because of systemd. I don't know how widespread it is, but it sure seems like there's a significant interest in going to operating systems that do not support systemd by default, because then the applications, the packages that you can get on those operating systems are also not compiled against systemd. Because apparently, I think now, I apologize if I'm misconstruing this completely, but from what I understand, on Gentoo, you have the decision of your init system. So you can choose systemd, or you can choose OpenRC, and I think they might have like sys5 init or some other ones there as well. And that's perfectly fine. You have your choice of init systems, but then the packages that you can actually install to run applications on your system are all compiled and built against systemd. So while yes, you can use OpenRC on your system, the number of applications you can actually run on that system are getting whittled down more and more and more, because the applications are being compiled and built against systemd.
Yeah.
So
there's going to be...
We'll see. Thankfully, we don't have that in BSD land, so you can still run Firefox. You can still run Chromium. You can still run all of those without systemd, and hopefully that doesn't change.
Cool. Yeah, otherwise we're going to be porting over OpenBSD's systemd shim at some point, which... Yeah, we'll probably just end up having to do that, right? If that's the direction Linux is going to go, they're going to force us to come up with some workaround to deal with it.
Some users are still going to want GNOME no matter what, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And I feel sorry for them, people. But okay. I understand that you really, really want it, but you might want to consider a change.
Yep.
Well, was there anything else you want to talk about?
Since we mentioned GNOME, I suppose one of the other things that I added into Lumina, I've always told people that you could reproduce the interfaces of other desktop environments. Well, now on the BSDs, if you really like GNOME, but you can't get GNOME working on most of the BSDs, then just install Lumina, go into your panel profile and say, install the GNOME profile, and it'll reconfigure Lumina to look like GNOME. So not GNOME 3, it's actually GNOME 2, the mate. I haven't written a GNOME 3 profile yet because they do, well, let's be frank, GNOME 3 isn't designed for desktops. It's designed for like touch devices and stuff. It just doesn't make sense. So I haven't bothered taking the steps to just assemble a profile for that, but you could if you wanted to. So just want to point that out. Try it out, and everything works in Lumina. It's all within Qt, and you don't have to worry about lagging support from those desktop environments on the BSDs.
Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks. Yeah, we really appreciate having you here in my office today, even though we're all split screen. Look, woo! I'm actually, I just got into your box.
Well, it looks really weird because on the screen you're actually on his right. So when you reached over, your arm went off the right side of the screen and then came back on the left. Like a video game.
That's very cool special effects, Al. I don't know how we managed that. Well, cool. Thank you so much for being with us this week.
Not a problem.
Okay, and so for the last sponsor this week, of course, if you've been with us a while, you know about Tarsnap, and you know how awesome it is. Website, of course, tarsnap.com/BSDNow. Seriously, if you've not tried it yet and you've been listening to BSD Now for this amount of time, good Lord, come on. Just try it.
You need to have the backups.
Super cheap. You need to have the backups. It's cheap. The backups are encrypted. Everything's done the way you want. Don't trust a lot of these other services where they claim they do all this deduplication, but then they're storing your data in the clear somewhere in the cloud where anybody has access to it. So Tarsnap does not do that kind of stuff. Oh, no. Matter of fact, they even put their money where their mouth is. They, first of all, make the source code public, so you're welcome to take a look at it, audit it, compile it yourself if you're truly paranoid. And then if you find a bug or can prove one, there's even bug bounties, too, where they will pay you if you can discover a bug in the software. So that's been going on for quite a while. And I think,
actually,
at this point, I'm not hearing.
So one of the components that I think is more on the server side of Tarsnap than on the client side, but one of the, so if you go to open source section on the Tarsnap website, they have a bunch of other bits of the application and the service that they've made open source, like scrypt, which is the key derivation function, Keyvalue, which is their data store, and spiped, which is basically just a pure encrypted pipe system. I think it's scrypt is having a new version is in beta right now, and that they double the bug bounty rewards during that time. So if you find a bug before the release and report it, the bug bounty is doubled.
Yeah, that's a great thing. So yeah, definitely check that out, audit it. And again, how many other backup services even talk about doing stuff like this?
Or how many other backup services release a bunch of their components of their system as open source code for you to use? The client, you have the source, but under a license where, it's for you to inspect it and compile it. Mm-hmm. Whereas these other components are BSD licensed, ready for you to, integrate into your own thing.
Yeah, definitely fantastic. So TarSnap's a great member of the community. They put their money where their mouth is, and you should really be trusting your backups to them, or not trusting in this case, because everything's encrypted. So because everything's encrypted on your end, you don't have to worry about if anybody in the cloud is doing something nefarious. So that's what me and Alan use for our backups, and we would highly encourage you to take a look at TarSnap this year if you've not already. Okay, so as we wrap up the show, everyone, we just got to remind you the usual stuff. First of all, feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's the address where you send everything. That's the only place we're going to see it. So send your questions, comments. If you have show ideas or topics, stories you want mentioned on the show, please send them all to feedback@bsdnow.tv. And then we'll be able to see it. Myself, Alan, and JT, our producer. So if you don't get a response back right away, don't panic, don't freak. It's not like it went off to DevNull or anything. It just means we're probably saving the question for a future episode.
Or in this case, Kris is away.
That's right. Out of town or something, right? That happens. So anyway, keep on sending it, and we will try and get those all worked into future episodes here in the near future. And, sorry, Alan, do you have something?
Just also, if you want to be interviewed or know someone, please get in touch.
Yes. Yes, definitely. And stories, too.
Stories.
So we don't always read all the same things you do. So you may find a cool little Dragonfly tidbit somewhere. Or NetBSD is doing something cool. Or
you did something cool.
It could be a story.
That's fine, too.
You did, yeah.
You know more. You know which part of it's interesting better than we do.
I don't know the stats of how many new GitHub projects are started every day, but it seems like there's new stuff popping up all the time. Sometimes that is a story in and of itself. We just go to the GitHub repo and some new tool just came out that does some really cool thing on a BSD. We want to hear about that, and we don't necessarily get to see them all. So send that in, and we'll try and get it into a future episode. But of course, we want to thank you for being here this week, and we'll look forward to speaking at you again here soon.